All right, so I gave you a critical thinking to think about starting last time. I said we'd finish talking about Kant today. And then I'll let you work in groups to answer the critical thinking question, which I put up here on the board. I'll make some statements about that. I wanted to first, before we do that, look at the D2L site because next week your article reviews are due. And so look at the rubric, which is in the syllabus, as to how that will be graded. If you go to your course content tab and then click on, you can see I post all of the lectures under the modules tab. I also post those in the news item, usually when I get them uploaded. But if you go to your syllabus tab and you scroll down, there is the article review assignment, which details what you're going to do. You're going to find some issue in ethics and marketing, the intersection of the two. You can use any credible source that you want, Academic Journal, New York Times, Washington Post, Dallas Morning News, Newsweek, Economist, U.S. News. Those are just a few. If you wonder whether or not something's credible, there are lots of think tanks out there that have a tendency to have benign sounding names and are actually associated with, either right-wing or left-wing sort of organizations. I would be suspect of some of those. It should be at least 3 pages in length, not including your cover page and your copy of the article. A good copy, in case you actually do pick up a Newsweek or something like that and have it, you need to just give me a photocopy of that. Or you can provide me with the URL. That's the web address in the bar. URL stands for what? I keep saying this in my principles of marketing class, just provide me with the URL, and they look at me like I'm crazy. Like, what is that? What does URL stand for? Uniform Resource Locator, isn't that right?
I know what it is. I don't know.
Okay. So just attach the link at the bottom of your document. There is a rubric which shows how I am going to grade it for spelling and grammar format. I had a student ask me what the hell spelling and grammar had to do with marketing one semester, and I sort of, after I picked myself up off the floor, I suggested that a lot of marketing is communication, and learning to communicate effectively is an important part of it. And grammar sort of helps with that. If you have one entire sentence that goes for 3 pages, which you did, without any punctuation, it becomes somewhat annoying to read. So look at the rubric: grammar, spelling, format, count, thinking of them, having the right length of pages, using the correct font, Times New Roman. Your introduction, having a clear thesis. This is about making an argument. We talked at the beginning of this class about making an argument. I assign you a book, a very thin, pithy little book called The Rule Book for Arguments, that suggests to you how you go about making valid arguments, because a lot of what we do in marketing is make arguments. We are fundamentally going to argue why our products or services for the companies that we represent, or the businesses or the nonprofits that we go to work for, are better than somebody else's. Why should you give, for example, if it's a nonprofit, to the Red Cross as opposed to giving to, Feed the Children? They both provide relief, which is better. It's about making an argument about what is the better service provider or product in the field, and so arguments are important. So you should have a clearly delineated thesis that connects something with theory from the ethical theories. We'll finish talking about deontological Kantian theory today with the analysis in your paper. So start out, there's an effective way that academics write. You're going to tell me what you're going to tell me, you're going to tell me, and then you're going to tell me what you said. My mother, who is an English teacher, insists that my writing is uninspired. Well, it's not supposed to be a mystery novel at this level. So think about that, and then reaching a nice conclusion. So the rubric tells you how many points are available for each category depending on how well you do. This is your opportunity if you don't do well on exams, if you can't make arguments in the exams to do well on this. So we'll start talking about those on Tuesday. If you go to, and I've logged in here as a student, so that you can see, if you go to the Assessments tab, D2L, there should be a tab for Dropbox, and the article review is there. So if you'll submit it in a Word doc format or PDF, that would be most helpful. So that's where you find the article review. Finishing up talking about Kant, we left off with what is logically consistent. How do you treat a rational being as an autonomous individual? And I guess I'm going to shut this with my loud voice. Well, you can never lie. Why can you never lie? Well, you can't form a society if people didn't have some idea of trust. And in fact, one of the prohibitions that we can find among all societies in all places at all times is the prohibition against bearing false witness against members of the in-group. Now, you may be able to do that to members of the out-group because we know that they're not deserving of protection, although as we become more sophisticated, we generally say that those prohibitions apply even to members of the out-group. So if you have a court case, for example, against Canadians, if you're selling goods, one of our biggest trading partners is who? Canada. Why is Canada one of our biggest trading partners? Well, there's something called the North American Free Trade Agreement. And if you have a choice of form, choice of law clause that says that you're going to resolve disputes based on Oklahoma law in the District Court of Oklahoma County, we don't say you can lie against the Canadians, because we've all seen the South Park episodes and know that what Canadians are, right? Now, you can't do that. That's not acceptable. You're not going to be able to lie in court against the Canadians as we become more sophisticated. We extend those prohibitions to even members of the out group. So, never lie. Well, we talked about maybe is this problematic? Can you ever lie in business? And I use the example of Pretty Woman and Richard Gere's character, who's an arbitrageur, and he bluffs in order to get this guy to basically fold and give him what he wants, which is the sale of his company in a hostile takeover. And it turns out that the bluff he makes is that he's tied up the contracts of the shipbuilding company that he wants to take over with the Senate Appropriations Committee. And it turns out that's not exactly true. He had delayed them, but it hadn't been at the end of the movie. He sort of has this come to Jesus moment where he recognizes that he doesn't build anything because Julia Roberts' character says, what do you build? And what do you make? And he says, well, we make money. And he gets to thinking about this, that, you know, is there real value? And he has this epiphany or awakening and starts thinking about it. Is it ever acceptable to lie in business? Kant would say no, you can't lie. What about the hypothetical of the inquiring murderer? Let's take an extreme example. What's the hypothetical of the inquiring murderer? Well, you live next door to Mr. and Mrs. Jones. Mr. Jones has a drinking problem and frequently becomes abusive with his wife. He's threatened his wife and told her that if she ever leaves, he will track her down and kill her. You see her pulling out of the driveway and she says, I'm going to the women's shelter. Please don't tell my husband because he will come and find me and kill me. Mr. Jones comes home several hours later, knocks on the door. Have you seen Mrs. Jones? I think she may have gone to the homeless shelter and has left me. I need to find her. What do? Kant would say you can't worry about the consequences. You know reasonably certainly that if you don't lie to him, what's going to happen? He's going to drive down to the homeless shelter and find Mrs. Jones, and maybe that will lead to bad results. And Kant would say, well, that's just too bad. You can't lie. Most of us would say, you lie. And say, she went to Portland. Or, she left and went somewhere else, and then you get on the phone with Mrs. Jones and call her and say, he's coming. and give her a heads up. Kant would say you can't lie. And for most of us, that's too harsh. Now, certainly, the exceptions to lying, and generally speaking in business, I think the exceptions to lying have to be very minimal. But, is it acceptable, for example, in the production and marketing of pharmaceutical drugs to lie to people? How many of you have seen the advertisements, if you suffer from blah, 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 you may be eligible to participate in a research study testing the effectiveness of drugs for IBSD, or depression, or all kinds of things that they have. And what are they going to do if you're in the trial? How do they test these drugs if you sign up for this? They're going to say, here's a drug that may help with your depression, and to one group of people, they're going to get what? A placebo. Is that lying to that group?
It's metrics.
Huh?
Metrics.
Well, I think Kant would say that's using people as a means to an end, and you can't do that. Most of us would say, how else are you going to test the efficacy? What do you do with these groups? Well, you give one group a placebo and you see if they have an interaction as opposed to the group that is the experimental group. And so Kant would say, never lie. Never lie. Well, why can you never lie? I think if you really pin it down, the reason that you can't lie is because if everybody lied, what would happen? We would have no trust in society, and ultimately the foundations of our ability to engage and build a cohesive society would crumble and fall. And isn't that sort of a backdoor way of saying that maybe results really do matter in some level? So again, the duty ethics are valid because it doesn't allow for exceptionalism. It's based on reason. It's absolutely calculating. How do we ascertain these principles? Well, we ascertain them using the formula Kant gives us, that it has to be logically consistent, universally applicable, and based on those two, you are duty-bound then to act upon the analysis. So it is absolutely logical. It is rational, comprehensive. But as with all of the theories that are valid, there are criticisms of them. And the criticism of Kant is that ultimately aren't we saying that to some extent results do matter? You can't treat people as a means to an end because it leads to ultimately bad results. So with that, I have put up this idea, this question that I wanted you to think about. So Kant and the utilitarians are predicated on this idea that we have free will. Now, one of the things, and the reason that I show you the Friends to Wall video is because maybe this idea of a biological challenge based on this ingrained premise within primates might suggest that maybe we are more reactive than we are actually products of free will. I don't know. So I want you to consider, does the biological basis that we see in animals, and the primates and the examples that they give you based on reciprocity and fairness, these ideas, do they lend support to this idea that maybe we are just reacting to a set of stimuli? There's this biological basis for it. So I'll give you, I said I'd give you about 10 or 15 minutes to come up with your answer in your groups, and then we will talk about that on Thursday. I will hand out the first exam, and you'll have class period, the rest of the class period to complete the exam or work on your group projects, and then next Tuesday we'll start talking about your article reviews, and then we'll move into the other chapters of the book. So I'll give you 10 or 15 minutes. I'll turn the recorder off now. You guys finished? All right, so who wants to go first? Which group wants to? You want to go first?
We'll go first.
All right.
Go first. Oh, wait.
So, Do you want like the short version or do you want the long version?
Let's have the long version. Let's hear your argument, fully fleshed out.
Fully fleshed out, natural selection lends itself to the idea that nature requires actions to promote survival. These actions are often done in groups to support the idea of herd behavior. Pure self-interest is antithetical to cooperation as observed in the test. However, one individual might still act with unique self-interest to gain support and to improve speciation. Therefore, if you act individually, you cannot promote evolution.
Okay, so you think that there's this? I mean, first of all, let's think about you're in Oklahoma, and the word evolution may be a bad word.
Right.
Aren't
How-
humans the only ones who don't use natural selection though? Every other species does.
Are we what?
Weak and sick, we don't.
Well, there is evidence to suggest that people do and in fact engage in natural selection. Why? They've actually started doing in the field of aesthetics. Generally, philosophers scorn empirical research studies because they believe that an argument falls or rises on its own merit a priori without reference to counting. That's not necessarily the business of philosophy. But one of the subfields of philosophy is aesthetics, and they have started actually doing in some philosophy departments this idea of experimental genetical responses to ideas of beauty. And one of the things that we find is that if you ask groups of people, or if you have people paint or describe their ideal scene, they are remarkably similar across groups. The thing that they describe is generally kind of a bucolic pastoral scene. There is proportionality, or they draw, there is proportionality on the paper that lends itself to this idea of symmetrical and symmetry. They've also done studies with babies where children are horribly honest, particularly babies in their reactions. Once they start to be able to focus, before they're actually able to verbalize, they'll flash pictures on screens and watch their reaction to it. And children will react very positively to, for example, the image of Denzel Washington. And why is it that Denzel Washington is considered to be such a attractive guy? He's almost perfectly symmetrical. Not quite, but almost perfectly. If you get too much symmetry, it kind of becomes freaky. But he's more symmetrical. If you flash a picture of Lyle Lovett, who married Julia Roberts, on the screen, like, the kids just bawl. They break out. They won't sit there and look at it. They'll look at a symmetrical face much longer than they will look at an asymmetrical face. And so, is there some biological basis to beauty and aesthetics? Is there something that we look for? Why is it that people are naturally attracted to certain body types and not to others? There could be some biological basis to that. So, if it's an evolutionary thing, isn't that lend support to the idea that maybe we are not really thinking about it, but we're using our, if these twin pillars are reciprocity and fairness, I mean, one of the things you see in the presidential debate, for example, is Donald Trump saying, I won't leave the Republican Party so long as they treat me fairly. And when the people say, what do you mean by fair? And we've talked extensively in here about what you mean by fair. He says, you know what fairness is. And I think there's a lot of people that think it's a gut check. It's this idea of, some sense of proportionality maybe. Okay, so you guys focused on evolution. Does that lend support to psychological egoism, though, that would say we are by nature social creatures? Okay, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, in just the individual creature in itself, it's going to have to look out for, have to have, the group's help in order to survive, and they can't survive on their own. And so not necessarily just with evolution, but their own survival in general. So.
The idea of psychological egoism asserts that you always act in your own self-interest.
Right.
So if your only self-interest is to not do anything, then you don't survive.
Yeah.
Okay, but
So, I mean,
acting in your
yes.
own self-interest could be reciprocity.
But are you making a choice to be reciprocal?
I don't know, I'm asking you.
Okay. Like in a negotiating a contract, there's some measure of reciprocity. I'm giving you, unless it's like aleatory or something, like I'm giving you this idea of exchange, like equal exchange. So like you're making a conscious concession, not necessarily biologically. Like you have to understand that by making this concession, by being reciprocal, I am ensuring that I am participating in the social construct of society properly and that I'm ensuring my survival. So it's a conscious effort to be reciprocal. I mean, like, you were taught to hold the door open for people, right? It's not something that I would do naturally. I would just walk through the door and keep going. I don't care who's behind me,
Mm-hmm.
right? So that's where I feel like it's more of a, you're making a logical leap to say, okay, well, we're being reciprocal in nature.
In the law, and one of the things that we look at with regard, since you bring up contract, in the law what we talk about is a product or a choice of free will. What is the product of free will from a legal perspective? It hinges on two things. One, that you're aware, and two, that the will isn't overborne. That the choice should be an intelligent, conscious choice. Now, consciousness and awareness is the easy prong of the test to satisfy. You're obviously conscious at this moment. You're not under the effects of hallucinatory drugs. At least we hope not. Although I did have a student tell me one time, one semester, several semesters ago, came in and wanted to know if she could sit in the back of the class. She normally sat sort of halfway in the middle of the class, but she said she had just gotten high and was not doing so well, so she wanted to make sure that she didn't want anybody to notice her. Well, she announces this, to me at the podium, and like, of course, everybody's now watching her, right? I mean, all eyes are turned on her because she's just admitted she smoked pot out in the parking lot or whatever, and came into class high. So, I mean, you all sitting there appear to be alert and chirpy, not under the influence of any narcotics or alcohol. The harder prong is an intelligent choice. What constitutes an intelligent choice in which the will is not overborne? Now, there may be an intelligent choice in which the will is overborne. And I can give you an example. In the past, in lots of states, before we had the Warren Court and the ideas espoused under the doctrine of Miranda versus Arizona, you would take a phone book, the police would take a phone book and say, now, you did this, didn't you? And a rather thick phone book, and if you said no, they'd give you a little whap upside the head, right? Why do you use a phone book? Well, it's the same reason that you use a rubber hose. When you whap somebody upside the head with the phone book, it creates a little bit of pain, but it doesn't leave marks, right? Rubber hoses don't leave, hit them with the rubber hose. Tase them. When I taught criminal law and procedure, I had students that constantly wanted to know, when they could tase somebody. That was their whole question. And I taught criminal law and procedure, which is basically the law of arrest and search. And if they jerk, can I tase them, or can I give them a little whap with the nightstick? Now, if somebody is sitting there and they're going to tase you, and they say, your signature is going to be on this confession, or I'm going to tase you, you might give in. And that might be a product of the will being overborne. And it might not necessarily be an unintelligent decision, given the alternative. So it's intelligent, conscious, and is the will overborne. It becomes less clear in cases where you have ever-increasing shades of gray, which is one of the things that they teach you in law school. They start having you distinguish case law from each other and see the evolution of case law. So there's a case from Florida in which police officers armed in SWAT-like uniforms, board buses at the bus station. Now, if I'm a bus operator, I might be apprehensive about this going on with my clients who may not want to ride on a bus after they've been exposed to this. But they board buses and they approach people as they're sitting down on the bus and ask them if they can search their luggage. And of course, overwhelmingly, these people say yes. And the defendant in this case says, their attorney argues, that their will was overborne because you have a police officer that's standing over you, one of which has a shotgun, by the way, that he's holding in the case that it involves. And they're standing there and they say, can I search your luggage? And Justice O'Connor, in the opinion of the court, says everybody knows that a question is a question, don't they? When I was full-time in the Office of Legal Counsel and teaching, I used to go into my secretary and say to her, Brandy, would you enter these attendance records in the grade book for me? Because I had to go to a meeting or whatever. And she would say, she couldn't pronounce my last name, so she called me Dr. Grant. Yes, Dr. Grantley, I will be happy to do that for you. Was that a question? It's phrased like a question, but was it a question? Or was it a command? Would the average citizen not versed in constitutional law? And Justice O'Connor says, everybody knows when a question's a question. They should know that they can say no. If they're asking you a question, you can say no. Do you know that? Or is the will overborne by this guy that's standing there with the badge and the gun? Is that a product of free will? I don't know. I don't know if it is or not. I think maybe the will is overborne. You're sitting down, there's this big guy standing over you with a gun. What are you going to say? No. The court says you should know without being told that you have the right to say no. I don't know. So if it's biological and there's this evolutionary basis to it, is it a product of free will? Or is it a product of natural selection?
So in that circumstance, right, you're making the conscious choice to preserve your own efficacy and participate, right? So your will is overborne, and you have to make the self-interested approach to say, yes, sure, I don't want to be arrested for standing in your way, right? So
Well, is that a free choice, though?
when your will is overborne,
Yeah, the court says it is.
that it's a free choice.
Yeah, the court says that's absolutely a free choice. You know, you can say no. Because they're asking a question.
Of course.
I don't know that it is.
No.
All right, well, I'm not sure that we're any further along.
I don't
Let's
know
see. Let's see what you all have come up with.
For our group, we said that the video does not lend support because they worked as a team in most situations.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the examples that we included were the monkey with the two colored chips,
Mm-hmm.
and where, as a recap, then one monkey would give a chip to one of the people, and then based on the color, either the monkey who gave it would either get a treat, or there's another monkey that's next to them, they would get a treat as well if they used a different one. So.
Right, so there is in that experiment, there was what they called a selfish token and a pro-social token. So he could make a choice between one of two. The difference was the color of the token, whether it was pro-social. Pro-social was green, I think, and the selfish token was red. And so what happened there?
So at first, the monkey gave a red token and he got a treat, and he noticed, and it was pointed out that the other monkey didn't get anything. Once he gave the other color, the monkey realized that both of them would get a treat. And so, as long as the monkey chasing him would be nice to him, I guess,
Mm-hmm.
then he would continue to give the green token to both of them would each get a treat. But then if the monkey was being bad, then he wouldn't get anything, and he would use the red selfish token.
Right, so the chimpanzee responded to if there was some kind of call of attention to the fact of, hey, I'm here, but it wasn't an antisocial call, he would generally use the prosocial token. If you looked at the graph, he would use the prosocial token. If the other chimpanzee engaged in what the one that had the choice, the opportunity to make the choice, perceived as being antisocial behavior by, and what did the monkey that was doing the antisocial behavior do by calling attention to himself? He started spitting water at the other one. He was spitting water. If he started spitting water, the one that had the choice, the tokens would sort of say, well, if you're not gonna play nicely, in effect, I'm not gonna give the prosocial token. And if it were just randomization of choice, if they were just giving the token because it was merely a Pavlovian response, what would you expect would be the reaction? What did they say the choice should be if it was merely a Pavlovian response? So Pavlov's dog is one of the classic experiments in the field of psychology where the bell rings and what happens? Pavlov trains his dog to, if the bell rings, what happens?
His mouth water.
Yeah, he starts salivating because that's an indication that what? It's feeding time. So if it was just a automatic response, what would you expect the randomization to be? What would you expect that the random token choice would be? It should be 50-50, right? I mean, if it was just purely random and you have an equal number, I mean, this is sort of basic statistics. If I have a set of marbles in a bag that are equal, one is a white marble and one is a black marble, what are the odds of me pulling out a white or black marble from the bag? It's 50-50. If you don't know. So obviously what they were saying is that there has to be some consciousness of the choice, because if it was just a random choice, if he was just handing tokens because it was merely a response to a stimuli, you would expect that you would have randomization of the tokens, if there are equal numbers of prosocial and selfish, and that's not what happens, right? There is a tendency towards the prosocial if there is another monkey present. So does that indicate that there is a choice or a free will? They seem to, I mean, he seems to say it does, but if you think about it, again, if there's some biological basis for reciprocity in certain creatures that are by nature social, wouldn't it be in your interest? I mean, what allows creatures, for the most part, that are social creatures to survive? Why is it, are monkeys the strongest, fastest species on the planet? No, a lot of them aren't. There are predators for lots of different types of primates. What allows them to survive? Why do you have in creatures that tend to be flock creatures, geese? Why do they tend to survive and why do they stay in flocks?
They work together for survival.
There's strength in numbers if you're a goose, which we have lots of out here. The only good decision Roger Webb ever made when he was president was the people in human environmental science, which we used to call home ec, got real upset that the geese were here because they were pooping on the sidewalk, and they said it was bad for the little children who were in the play center that they use in human environmental science. And they wanted us to get rid of to trap the birds and get rid of them. And Roger Webb not only didn't trap the birds, he started building little huts out along the lake so that they could have a place to nest and a little ramp so that they could get out of the lake easily. Why do they travel and why do they tend to flock together? Well, it's a safety and numbers thing. Why do the fish synchronize. It's a safety in numbers from predators, right? So is that indication of free will though? Or is it a product of, I recognize that turnabout may be fair play? If I'm the chimpanzee, what could happen next time? The other chimp could be the one that has the choice between the tokens. And so maybe I'm going to reciprocate because it's in my own selfish interest to be fair, to be reciprocal. Right? Maybe, I don't know. Okay, what did you all come up with?
We decided that it did support the argument because throughout the video the animals were helping each other. They weren't necessarily reaping the benefits of the activities that were going on, but they still had selfless concern toward the other animal that did. One of the examples was the two monkeys that were in the cage that were pulling the food box towards them. At one point in the experiment, one monkey had been fed while the other one was still hungry. It wasn't necessarily jumping at joy to help him pull the box, but he did without hesitation.
There was some hesitation there, wasn't there?
Well, there was hesitation, but he didn't fight him. When the other monkey would tap him on the shoulder, he would go over to the rope and pull it.
And then he'd lose interest and stop.
Have to do it again. He did this selflessly, but you feel like in the back of his mind, next time he's the one that's hungry, another one has been fed, that the other monkey will help him the same way he helped him during that time.
So you think that there is free will then, that it demonstrates that this idea of fairness is a product of non-coerced or non-autonomic responses?
Yeah.
What about the reaction of the monkeys that got grapes or bananas? See, again, I think going back to what they said, you could say, well, he knows that next time the shoe might be on the other foot. They can think far enough, which shows some level of consciousness and awareness of being distinct and separate from the cosmos. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's a priori free will. What about the one who, I think maybe the other experiment is, you give me a rock, and one monkey gets what? Grapes, and one monkey gets cucumber. And as long as you give the first monkey that gets the cucumber, what does he do with the cucumber the first go-around? He eats it. That's just perfectly fine. He's perfectly happy with that until he sees the other one getting the grapes. Now, what did they say? And so, Franz de Waal says that one of the issues that a philosopher brought up was that he would believe that maybe there was free will in these animals if what would happen? If the one that got grapes would refuse the reward until the other one got grapes. And in fact, what will they do? In some of the studies, they would. He said that in some instances, the monkey would refuse the grape until the other one got the grape. Now, that does seem to me to lend some support to the idea of free will, because I'm not making a choice that has anything to do with you. It's independent. The choice is completely independent of what I get. The only choice that the monkey has in that experiment is what? Either to hand the rock or not. To give them the rock and get the reward. And it doesn't matter, it's not like I have two different rocks. It's not like the token one, it's a rock. I have basically one choice that I can make, either to give the rock or not. And in fact, they would withhold, in some instances, the rock until the other one got the same reward. Which does seem to me to say that there is maybe some, because at this point, it's not about necessarily a survival autonomic response to, I mean, we all need sustenance, we all need food. It is about, all I have is to give you the rock. And my choice of the rock has not got anything to do to either give the rock with whether or not you get something. It's not the pro-social token. But if I refuse the rock, well, then that does, I mean, there's no external stimuli for the monkey in that instance, other than some idea of fairness, maybe, okay? What did you all come up with?
We basically said, like what they did, with the monkeys that were working together, to pull the food to them, the one that wasn't hungry would still help out the monkey that was hungry, because he figured that later on the other monkey would return the favor. So he was working in his own personal interest to help out that monkey. So eventually it will be returned to him. And it's like that when what you were saying, when they're in groups and everything, being in that like social group is actually in their self-interest.
Mhm.
And so that's what we thought, that video really did show that or supported a psychological egoism.
Okay. Now, with regard to the elephant experiment, though, what does the one elephant do?
He stands on the rope while he lets the other one pull it. And so, I mean, he's working in his own he's sort of making the other elephant work for him, which is in his
He's free riding.
Yeah.
Now, it turns out that in studies of elephants, they have a highly developed sense of memory. They will remember, they have done these, where they chase them off, where they chase elephants. There's a study that I was watching the other day where they chase them out of these fields because they're obviously destroying the farmers' crops. So we have encroached upon what was at one time their territory, and they get chased off. And in some countries, they shoot them, or there's poaching. And it turns out that they remember for a long time. A pack of elephants will remember if somebody did something to one of their members, and they will go back and seek revenge. They can go back and actually attempt to get even with the evildoer that did something to their packmate. When a primate, or when an elephant's mother dies from poachers or shooting, they become enormously distressed, and they remember that for long periods of time, which seems to suggest that they have some awareness of a temporal aspect of life. But the elephant basically freeloads in that one. He learns that if he stands on the rope, he doesn't have to do anything. And it's not as though it's all that much effort, is it?
No.
I mean, for him to do it. The device is not really all that heavy in terms of, and so the way they designed the device, because they can't make one, he says, it'd be very difficult to make a device that was too heavy for one elephant to pull, is what happens if they don't act together in some coordinated fashion, is the rope will just pull through and the box will stay outside the area where they can grab it with their trunk and eat it. And so you've got this one elephant that is acting in sort of a freeloading manner. I mean, he's helping somewhat, isn't he? Because if he doesn't stand on the rope, what happens? It goes through and neither of them get anything, but he's not necessarily acting in the most social. Now, does that lend itself to the idea that there may be some free will? Because he's acting in an antisocial, and they are creatures that live with, at least within female groups. Now, male elephants generally are solitary, but female elephants are social, and they live in groups, and there will be a dominant female. Does that suggest that there may be some free will?
I think that there's always a little bit of free will, and some of that's learned over time, and then there's other things that are just inherited and ingrained into species, whatever animal it is, they all have that will to survive. And like you said, it goes with every group of animals, whether it's mammals that they were testing or, schools of fish, they all survive together. But there's always going to be a little bit of learned free will.
But it seems to me that with the elephants there is some evolved idea, because he does recognize that it's going to take some amount of cooperation. I've got to stand on it.
Yeah.
But if it was totally a product of we have to stick together to survive, he would do, that was their female elephants, would do what? She would work in cooperation to do it out of fear. But it seems to me that clearly is at least some example, because it's not completely antisocial, but it's not completely pro-social. And you're both going to get fed. It's just that one of you is going to do a little bit more work than the other. And so I'll just stand on the rope and wait for my sister to pull it in.
I think another idea of free will, it doesn't really have to do with survival, but it kind of made me think of, I used to have this bird dog that he would speak for a treat. And, but we had several other dogs, and they knew if they heard him bark that he was getting fed, and they would all run up. So if they were all sleeping in the living room, he would kind of just whisper. He would just do it real quiet. He would look around, and he would make sure they wouldn't hear, so he would get more treats, and he would get all the attention. I mean, that's kind of an example of free will right there.
One of the things that there's a experimental psychologist who's done this experiment with his dog. The dog has over 1,000 toys, and they did this special on 60 Minutes with Anderson Cooper, and the question was, is my dog scanning me? It turns out that we have domesticated dogs over a long period of time. There's actually a great book out there that answers kind of stupid questions. And the title of the book is the one question that they said came the closest to being the dumbest question. It was written by a couple of college professors, and they got other experts from other fields to contribute to the book. And the title of the book is, "When Did Wild Poodles Roam the Earth?" And they actually have this question answered in the text of the book. And they said, while technically not the dumbest question or not a really truly stupid question, this comes pretty close to being a stupid question, because the answer is that wild poodles never roamed the earth. Wild poodles are derivatives of some kind of wolf species that through centuries and centuries and centuries of domestication, we have bred for these characteristics. And so, it started out as some kind of wolf species. Cultural anthropologists and archaeologists hypothesize that initially, maybe there's one hypothesis that says that primitive man followed packs of dogs because they could they could scavenge after the dogs. But then when man started to understand, and when we became more than just Homo erectus and other species, Lucy, for example, which is a distant ancestor of Homo sapien, when that began to evolve and we began to use tools, then perhaps the order reversed and packs of dogs started following man to scavenge after what was left over from the camps, and through that interaction they became domesticated. Over time we captured them and domesticated them, and we bred them then for certain characteristics depending on what the breed of the dog is suited for. And so I watched, did any of you watch the American Kennel Club Westminster Dog Show? And see who won this year? It was a pointer that won Best in Show this year. There was kind of a funny movie that made fun of people who do dog shows, and I have several friends who show dogs, and it's pretty accurate about
Two Left Feet or something.
Yeah,
like that.
the guy
Yeah,
whose
it's called
wife
Best in Show, I think.
is the one that handles the dog. Dogs learned patterns of behavior that got them rewards, is what some biologists and cultural anthropologists hypothesize, that the most successful of them were the ones that were cute, and that the ideal age, the ones that you get the most out of, are the ones that can imitate, for example, a 3-year-old. Because 3 years old, you have started to develop some personality, and you can express your will, but you're still really cute, aren't you? You're really cute, and you get what you want, and the dogs start recognizing this, and so the ones that survived the best were the ones that were sort of cute and were able to mimic that neediness and affection of a 3-year-old. So they did this experiment with this dog that this clinical or this experimental psychologist has. He's got 1,000 toys for the dog, and guess what? He has learned the commands. Now, and they do experiments where the dog can hear, for example, this doctor's voice, who is his owner or his person, but not see it. And so, a lot of people would say, well, what the dog is responding to is cues from your facial expression as to what. And it turns out that this dog is really pretty bright. He's worked with this psychologist over and over and over a number of years, and he's learned about 1,000 different words. That's pretty impressive, isn't it? And he can find things with great accuracy based on, and the psychiatrist has trained himself to use the same tone and inflection so that the dog isn't cued as to what it was. But even if it was cued, it would be hard to cue 1,000 different words and not have the dog being able to distinguish. So then they put the dogs in fMRI machines to watch what happens in their brains. And does the dog really feel an emotion towards their owner or towards their person? Or is the dog scamming you? And what do they do in that? Anybody see this program on 60 Minutes? The way they monitor what the reaction of the brain is in the dog is dogs have an enormously good sense of smell. There's a Supreme Court case which says that dog sniffs are sui generis, they're not a search within the meaning and the ambit of the Fourth Amendment. And so that's why they can have the dogs go up and search your car, and it's not a search because it's sui generis. A dog's nose is enormously powerful, and they can smell all kinds of things. And we're training dogs to do even more than we had initially thought. So one of the things that they can do very early on in detection is for melanoma. Melanoma is the one skin cancer. Most skin cancers are fairly easy to treat. Melanoma is the one that's the most difficult because if it expands, it can go into your brain and it can kill you. And when they cut out a melanoma tumor, they have to cut out, there's a formula that they use to ensure that they don't break off any of the parts of the cancerous growth, because if they do, it will enter the bloodstream and then into the adrenal glands and your lymph nodes, and you'll be dead. So dogs can smell melanoma. They're really good at detecting the smell of melanoma before it really becomes a mole that would be suspicious, so early detection. So they put these dogs in these fMRI technology, these fMRI machines, and monitor their brainwaves. And what they do is they take scents from their owner. It's kind of a disgusting experiment. They swab their underarms and non-owner, and then watch what the reaction is. And when the dog smells the perspiration of the owner, the part of the brain that we generally think of as being the pleasure part, the part that experiences intense emotion like love and happiness and joy, is the part of the brain that actually activates. So they hypothesize that really your dog does get very excited, and it's not just a scam. The dog is not just about surviving. It is actually experiencing these emotions of joy and happiness at the scent of its owner. So I don't know. It's interesting. It's one of these areas where science, and one of the things that it tells us, and one of the arguments that I make in things like against the book Biology, is that we can know what parts of the brain are being activated, but we don't necessarily know what you're absolutely thinking. We know what kinds of maybe sensations you're experiencing, but not what you're actually thinking about. And so I really question whether or not the book Biology, which sort of suggests that we have autonomic responses to this, actually proves what the author says it does. All right, so let me have your papers, and